Hello class, and welcome to Module 4 of Introduction to the New Testament, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew. Uh, as we work through these Synoptic Gospels, I'm probably going to divide each lecture into two separate lecture components. The first will be a lecture component that will deal with authorship, date, provenance, which means where do we think it was written, and then the second video lecture will deal with the outline and themes of the book. So that'll break it up a little bit. It'll make the videos a little shorter, a little easier to watch, I hope, and less tedious for you. So with that in mind, I want to open by reading from the opening verse of Matthew's Gospel, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. The author of Matthew's Gospel clearly intends for us to see the book in light of the Old Testament, in light of the promises made to David and to Abraham of a seed that would be the deliverer, that would overcome evil and would rule justly on David's throne. And the fact that he opens with this phrase, the genealogy of, even ties it, I think, thematically to the book of Genesis, which is marked off by 10 separate divisions within the book of Genesis, each one beginning with, these are the generations of. And so I think thematically we're connected as well to Genesis. So let's talk about the authorship, date, and provenance of the book. With regard to authorship, tradition ascribes the authorship to the Apostle Matthew. Matthew is also known in the New Testament as Levi. The internal evidence in the book certainly supports a Jewish author. It is a very Jewish book. It reflects Jewish thinking, Jewish culture, Jewish life. The book is obviously written by someone with a Jewish background. The external evidence for this includes the ancient tendency to attach an author's name to his work. Its early ascription to Matthew in the first quarter of the second century bears that out, that from the very earliest time of its copying and transmission, it was attributed to Matthew and to no one else. There are no known copies without the name Matthew, and there are no known copies with any other name. It is only ever attributed to Matthew. And this occurs very early in the first quarter of the second century. The earliest manuscripts ascribe it to Matthew. Papias, who I mentioned in a previous lecture, was one of the very early church fathers, perhaps was discipled by the Apostle John. Papias and other early witnesses support Matthew's authorship of the book. Papias even says that Matthew wrote a Hebrew or Aramaic version. No surviving Hebrew version has been found yet that cannot be demonstrated in some way to be a translation from Greek back into Hebrew, although there have been some contenders, and some of them very old. Modern scholarship assumes this is an anonymous document. It is unsigned in the text itself. The ascriptions to Matthew are second century. Various literary critical approaches have suggested different levels of development in the text before it achieved its final form as we have it now. So higher critical scholars look at it and they see a work that has undergone revision and adaptation and compilation perhaps and editing, and consider that there may have been a primitive Matthew text behind it. They will argue that, for one, that Matthew is dependent upon the Gospel of Mark. We'll talk about that when we get to the book of Mark, how Mark relates to Matthew and Luke. It's called the synoptic problem. What is the interdependence between Matthew, Mark, and Luke? And so there's an argument that it's dependent upon Mark, that it is also dependent upon an unknown source called Q by scholars, taken from a German word that means source, and that Luke and Matthew both relied on this Q for certain aspects of their material. So That's a bit of a thumbnail sketch of the issue of authorship. Now, when was it written? That's the next big question. And what you believe about when it was written may say a lot about what you believe about the nature of the Bible itself, about the existence of God, and about God's ability to intervene in human history. The traditional view dates Matthew to before AD 70, sometimes allowing for dependence on Mark's gospel and sometimes not, depending on who you're reading. But before AD 70, Jesus in Matthew 24 predicts the destruction of the temple that took place in AD 70. And we know that early Christians, on the basis of this prediction in the 60s, many of them fled Jerusalem and left before the Romans conquered the city, on the basis of Jesus' prediction that the city would be destroyed. And so traditional scholarship says that this was written before AD 70 and includes these prophetic pronouncements of Jesus about the coming destruction of Jerusalem. Modern scholarship, because of its presuppositions regarding the nature of authorship and its rejection of prophetic revelation, the ability to know based on divine revelation the future and tell what that is, its rejection of prophetic revelation dates the book to the mid-80s, after the fact of the destruction of Jerusalem, and then understands Jesus's prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem as something that that whoever the author of Matthew was, these are words put in Jesus's mouth, if you will, rather than words he actually said, in order to make him appear more like a prophet. So those who hold to a late date for Matthew, 80 or later, generally reject the prophetic nature of Revelation and will argue that this is the early church putting these words in the mouth of Jesus in the text, rather than admitting that Jesus could have said this prediction, could have spoken this prediction before Jerusalem was conquered, and that Matthew could have written it down before Jerusalem was conquered. So that's sort of the ball game there. Both traditional and modern scholarship tend to favor the idea that the book was probably written somewhere in the province of Syria. The exact location, of course, is not known. The text doesn't tell us anything, but it does connect with a significant Jewish population. And we know that in various parts of Syria, the Roman province of Syria, there were pockets, large pockets of Jewish population. And so the book seems to come from Syria. And both critical scholars and traditional scholars believe this to be true. And so that is the background for the Gospel of Matthew. In the next video lecture, we will discuss theological themes and the outline of the book of Matthew.